My nephew sent me a clip of my family calling me the last resort, while I'd been covering their bills for months. He doesn't do enough, they said. I didn't say a word, but when the next utilities were due, they found out what I had done. I, 34M, never thought I'd be writing this, but I need to get this off my chest because what happened still feels surreal. For the past 8 months, I'd been quietly covering my parents' and sister's utility bills. Not because they asked, they never did, but because I overheard Mom crying on the phone about choosing between electricity and groceries. Dad's hours got cut at the factory, and my sister just went through a messy divorce that left her financially destroyed. I make decent money in tech, so I set up automatic payments for their gas, electric, and water bills under my credit card. They never knew it was me. I thought I was being helpful. Turns out, I was being stupid. Last Tuesday, my nephew Jake called me. He's 16 and has always been close to me. I taught him to code, helped him build his first computer. His voice sounded weird when he asked if I could come over to help with his laptop. When I got there, he pulled me aside and showed me his phone. The video was from their family group chat, the one I'm apparently not part of. Mom, Dad, my sister Sarah, and even my brother-in-law were sitting around their kitchen table, and Jake had been recording from the stairs. They were talking about me. Mom was complaining about how I never visit enough, how I don't call, how I seem distant lately. Dad chimed in saying I act like I'm too good for the family now that I have money. But it was Sarah who really twisted the knife. She said I was selfish, that I only show up when it's convenient, and that they only reach out to me as the last resort when they need something because I never do enough for the family. The last resort. 8 months of covering their bills, and I was the last resort who doesn't do enough. Jake looked mortified as he showed me. He told me he'd been hearing them talk like this for weeks, and he couldn't stand it anymore. He said he knew I'd been helping somehow because he'd seen the relief on his mom's face when bills came in, but she never mentioned me paying anything. I thanked Jake, fixed his laptop, and drove home in complete silence. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying Sarah's words, Mom's complaints, Dad's dismissive tone. The last resort. The next morning, I logged into my banking app and canceled every automatic payment. Gas, electric, water, everything. 8 months of payments, gone. I didn't call them. I didn't send a text. I just stopped. Then I waited. The first call came 5 days later. Mom, panicked, saying their electricity was about to be shut off. She asked if I could lend them some money, just until Dad's next paycheck. I told her I was sorry, but I was tight on cash myself. She seemed surprised. I'd never said no before. 2 days after that, Sarah called. The gas company had sent a final notice. She was almost crying, asking if I could help just this once. I told her I wished I could, but I had my own bills to worry about. She got quiet and hung up. Dad called the next day about the water bill. Same story, same response from me. He actually got angry, asking what happened to family helping family. I told him I agreed. Family should help family. He didn't catch the irony. By the end of the second week, all 3 households had received shut-off notices. The calls became more frequent, more desperate. They started asking why I seemed so different lately, why I wasn't helping like I used to. I kept giving vague responses about my own financial situation being tight. That's when Sarah showed up at my apartment. She looked terrible, stressed, exhausted. She sat on my couch and broke down, telling me how scared she was, how she didn't know what to do. She said she was embarrassed to keep asking for help, but she didn't have anyone else to turn to. She called me her last resort. Those words again. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. The stress lines around her eyes, the way her hands shook slightly. Part of me wanted to cave, to tell her everything would be okay, that I'd handle it like I always did. But then I remembered that video, her voice saying I never do enough. I told her I was sorry, but I couldn't help this time. She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. She asked what was wrong with me, why I was being so cold. I just shrugged and said sometimes people have to figure things out on their own. She left angry. The breaking point came 3 weeks after I'd stopped the payments. Jake called me, crying. He said they were going to lose everything, that his mom was talking about moving in with their grandmother, that his grandfather was having chest pains from the stress. He begged me to help, said he didn't understand why I wasn't doing anything. That broke my heart. Jake was innocent in all this. But I also knew that if I caved now, nothing would change. They'd go back to taking my help for granted and talking about me behind my back. I told Jake I loved him, but this was between the adults in the family. Update 1. The family meeting happened on a Sunday. Mom called and said they needed to have a serious talk about the family's financial situation. Everyone would be there. Parents, Sarah, even my brother-in-law. They wanted me to come over for dinner and discuss how we could all help each other. I almost laughed. Now they wanted family unity. I went, but I brought something with me, a folder full of bank statements and payment confirmations. 8 months' worth. Every utility bill I'd covered, every payment I'd made. The total was just over $4,200. Dinner was tense. Everyone looked exhausted, stressed. The conversation started with Mom explaining how difficult things had been, how they'd all been struggling. Dad talked about his reduced hours, Sarah about her divorce expenses. They painted a picture of a family in crisis. Then Mom looked at me and said they needed to discuss everyone contributing more to help each other. She said they knew I was doing well financially, and they hoped I could step up more for the family. Sarah nodded along, saying we all needed to sacrifice for each other. The last resort needed to step up more. I let them finish their speeches about family responsibility and mutual support. Then I placed the folder on the table. I told them I agreed completely about family helping family. I said I thought it was important for everyone to know exactly who had been contributing what. Then I opened the folder. The silence was deafening as I went through each statement. Every electricity bill I'd paid for Mom and Dad's house. Every gas bill for Sarah's apartment. Every water bill for both households. Month after month, payment after payment. Mom's face went white. Dad's mouth fell open. Sarah just stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. I told them I'd been covering their utilities for 8 months. Not because they asked, but because I heard Mom crying about money and wanted to help. I explained how I'd set up automatic payments, how I'd never mentioned it because I didn't want them to feel embarrassed or obligated. Then I told them about the video Jake had shown me. The room got even quieter, if that was possible. Sarah's face flushed red. Mom started to say something, but I held up my hand. I repeated their words back to them. How I never do enough. How I'm selfish. How I'm only good as a last resort. I told them I'd decided they were right. I wasn't doing enough. So I'd stop doing anything at all. Dad tried to interrupt, saying they didn't mean it that way, that family conversations get heated sometimes. I told him I understood perfectly what they meant. The last resort who doesn't do enough had finally lived up to their expectations. Sarah started crying, saying she was sorry, that she was just stressed and didn't mean those things. I told her stress doesn't create feelings, it just reveals them. Update 2. The aftermath was exactly what I expected and somehow worse than I'd imagined. Mom immediately went into damage control mode, insisting they were all just overwhelmed and didn't mean what they'd said. She kept repeating that I was a good son, that they appreciated everything I'd done. But her apologies felt hollow, more about getting the money flowing again than actual remorse. Dad took a different approach. He got defensive, saying that family members should be able to vent to each other without it being held against them forever. He argued that I was being too sensitive, that I should have just talked to them instead of playing games with their utilities. Sarah oscillated between tearful apologies and frustrated anger. She'd say she was sorry for what she'd said, then in the same breath ask why I'd let them suffer when I knew they were struggling. She couldn't seem to grasp that her words had consequences. The most telling moment came when Mom asked what I wanted them to do to make things right. I told her I didn't want anything. I just wanted them to understand how their words had affected me. She nodded along, then immediately asked if I could at least help with the electricity bill since winter was coming. They still didn't get it. I left that dinner with a clear conscience and a clear understanding of where I stood with my family. The folder stayed on their table. Over the next few days, I got a barrage of calls and texts. Mom sent long messages about family forgiveness and moving forward. Dad left voicemails about not letting pride destroy the family. Sarah sent a mix of apologies and guilt trips about how her kids were suffering because of my decision. But the call that mattered most came from Jake. He apologized for showing me the video, saying he'd caused all this trouble. I told him he'd done nothing wrong. He'd show me the truth, and the truth was never the problem. The problem was what people chose to do with the truth. He asked if I was ever going to help them again. I told him honestly that I didn't know. Trust, once broken, doesn't automatically repair itself just because someone says they're sorry. 3 days after the family meeting, Sarah showed up at my apartment again. This time she was angry from the start. She accused me of being vindictive, of punishing her kids for something she'd said in a moment of stress. She said I was tearing the family apart over hurt feelings. I asked her if she thought her words were just hurt feelings. She said yes, that everyone says things they don't mean when they're stressed. I asked her if she'd ever called anyone else in the family selfish or a last resort during her stress. She went quiet. I told her that stress doesn't make people say things they don't mean. It makes them say things they usually keep to themselves. Her words weren't a mistake. They were her honest opinion of me. She left even angrier than she'd arrived. Update 3. It's been 2 months since I stopped the payments, and the dust has finally settled into a new normal that nobody likes, but everyone has had to accept. Mom and Dad managed to avoid shutoffs by borrowing money from Dad's brother, something they'd apparently been too proud to do before, but suddenly became an option when their free ride ended. They're making payments on both the borrowed money and their current bills, which means they're struggling but managing. Sarah had to move in with Mom and Dad temporarily. Her pride took a massive hit, but her bills are consolidated now. She's picked up a part-time job on weekends to help with expenses. Jake seems happier having his grandparents around, even if the living situation is cramped. The family dynamic has shifted completely. Where I used to be the reliable one they could count on, I'm now treated with a mixture of resentment and cautious politeness. Family gatherings are awkward affairs where everyone walks on eggshells around me. Mom still calls regularly, but our conversations are different. She updates me on family news and asks about my life, but there's an underlying tension. She's waiting for me to offer help that I'm not offering. Sometimes I catch her starting to mention a financial worry, then stopping herself. Dad has essentially written me off. He's polite when we interact, but the warmth is gone. He's decided I'm selfish and vindictive, and nothing I say will change his mind. In his view, family helps family unconditionally, and I violated that sacred trust. Sarah and I have the most complicated relationship now. She's genuinely tried to apologize and rebuild our connection, but she's also frustrated that her apologies haven't restored the status quo. She wants forgiveness to equal a return to how things were, and she doesn't understand why it doesn't work that way. The person who's handled this best is Jake. He comes over every few weeks to work on coding projects with me. He never mentions the family drama, never asks for money, never tries to guilt me into helping. He just wants to spend time with his uncle, and that means everything to me. Last week, he told me something that put everything in perspective. He said his mom had been complaining to his grandmother about how stubborn I was being, and his grandmother had asked a simple question. If he was really as selfish as you say, why was he paying your bills for 8 months without telling anyone? Sarah apparently didn't have an answer for that. The truth is, I don't regret what I did. Not the 8 months of helping, and not the decision to stop. The helping showed me who I really am. Someone who takes care of family without expecting recognition. The stopping showed me who they really are. People who take that care for granted while criticizing the person providing it. I've learned that being family doesn't give people the right to treat you poorly without consequences. It doesn't mean you have to accept being taken for granted or talked about behind your back. And it definitely doesn't mean you have to keep helping people who see your help as insufficient while simultaneously depending on it. Would I help them again in a real emergency? Probably. But the days of quietly covering their bills while they complain about my lack of contribution are over. They wanted to know what I actually contribute to this family, and now they know exactly what that looks like. Sometimes the last resort has to become no resort at all for people to understand what they've lost. My family learned that lesson the hard way, and honestly, so did I. The most important thing I've learned is that respect isn't automatically granted because of blood relations. It has to be earned and maintained. My family forgot that, and now we're all dealing with the consequences of that forgotten truth. I'm not the same person who quietly paid bills while being called selfish behind closed doors. I'm someone who knows his worth and expects others to recognize it too. If that makes me the villain in their story, I can live with that. At least I'm not living a lie anymore.